Ladies and gentlemen of Bucharest, please give a warm welcome to Vitaly Friedman.
Oh. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you. All right, it's my pleasure to be here back as well, because I was here, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. Two years ago. So it's really great to be back. I love food in Romania and other things as well. So I was thinking a lot about how we can actually start and what would be a nice way to start a conference. And I was thinking about doing something special to set the mood, if you like. Are you ready for this? For just a quick side note, for those of you who attended my workshop yesterday, you might find a few familiar things, but not too many. So please stick around. So let's go. I hope I have audio, because we'll need to do some special thing here. All right, fingers crossed it works. So we're going to play a little game. We're going to play the Responsive Adventures game. And it's a front-end game designed just for you, in a way. Where I'm going to pose some interesting front-end challenges, not the simple ones like how do we deal with off-canvas navigation, things like that, but really interesting, complex challenges that many companies spend months on, right? And if you think that you have a good idea, I'm going to reward you with a piece of chocolate. So this is how it goes with games. So I have some chocolate in here. So if you think that you have a good idea, you can just shout, and then I'm just going to throw chocolate at you. Doesn't sound fair enough to you? You're not very excited yet. I don't like this. We'll see. I know how it works. Okay, I'll figure it out as I go. All right, but this is going to be interesting because we have to pick our battles first. Now this is a game, so I need you to tell me. I hope you appreciate the sound effects that are going to accompany this session. You need to tell me, right? You have to tell me what kind of level are you at. So we can play 3 levels. We can play easy, medium, or hardcore level. All right. So who feels like easy level, like beginners, like starting out for the game? Medium. Who wants to go hardcore? All right, let's see. So we'll just pick one, and we'll pick something between medium and hardcore. So ready for level 1? It's kind of a bit loud, maybe. Although it's just 3 out of 5 stars. So let's start with something that's actually quite simple. Let's start with fluid typography, right? Now, basically what you will find today is like lots of little front-end challenges that are very common, that I keep running all the time. I mean, most of the time is spent in smashing as editor at Smashing Magazine and actually writing articles and editing articles and stuff like that. But many things are being kind of learned from consulting. So here's one of the tasks, and we start simple. So you have to build in fluid flexible type with as few media queries as possible. Now, your simple goal is for H2 to grow fluidly within from 16 to 24 pixels in the 400 to 800 pixels range. What do you do? Now, do you have any idea what you would do here? Now, this is what we could do potentially, right, with fluid type. We can just use the calc function with viewport units, and then if we have, let's say, a calc of font size calc 1M plus 1 VW, then everything grows naturally, right? Because it actually depends on the viewport unit. 1 VW is, for those of you who don't know, is basically 1% of the viewport width, right? So because we're kind of calculating the value by combining 1M and 1 VW, 1M is going to be our minimum font size, and then the typography just grows naturally, right? As we increase the window. But the problem is, it still can be very small. If 1 VW is very, very small, or 1% of the viewport is very, very small, our type is going to be very small. We want to have some more control, right? Because this is kind of easy to do. If we just want to combine, font size with, VW and maybe M units, we can achieve something like that, which is beautifully fluid. But this is not quite what we want. Because what we want is to transition beautifully within a specific breakpoint range from one value to another value, right? And this is kind of not easy, right? So this is what we want. We want to choose a font size of 16 pixels at 400 pixels, breakpoint, and then transition beautifully to 24 pixels at a resolution of 800 pixels. Now, how would we do this? I got chocolate. Anybody? I mean, it's not trivial, but it's more about the idea. I'm just going to start throwing chocolate at you because I feel like it. I don't take any credit or responsibility for whenever I hit somebody or not, by the way. I hope we have good insurance. All right? All right, yes? So the idea is to combine one VW unit with M, which is going to be our font, like minimum font size, and then multiply it with a certain factor that would actually define how much we're closer to 800 pixels. Now this is kind of the right idea, the right approach, because this is what we will end up with normally if we just scale by using, VW or VH. So we have a very proportional scale, but we don't want it proportional. We want it to be more fluid. And maybe, you want to have something like typographic scale or modular scale, we want it to be transitioning to specific values. So this is what we can do, and we just plug it in a little formula, where we have a calc, again, here. This is our minimum font size. This is where we're starting at, right, 16 pixels. Now this sounds really ridiculously complicated and everything, but in the end, just to give you intuition, it's actually quite simple. Now here we've got the maximum screen size minus minimum screen size. This is the entire area over which we're going to increase the font size. Here we're defining how much space we have left in the viewport, and here we're defining what actually the weight factor is. So the difference between the maximum font size and the minimum font size, right? And we multiplied everything, like we multiply this factor that we have right now with what we're transitioning over, and then we add minimum font size and we're done. And then as a result, right, you end up with something like this. And it doesn't need even one single media query. You can just plug it in on a page, on a site, anywhere, then it's just going to work magically. You will not have to deal with media queries. And I'm not a big fan of media queries, because every single time you add a media query, at some point in the future, you will have to revisit that media query, right? So that just works. And just in case you're wondering, Calc, of course, is well supported pretty much everywhere except who, but we're used to that. And also, we actually published an article about this, which kind of contains some information about how you can do it. You just plug it in the formula. But one thing that is kind of important to note at this point is that whenever we're talking about the font size, we can't just talk about font size alone, because typography always has three connected parts: the font size, the line height, and the line length, right? And we need to kind of incorporate them both in a way. So can we achieve the same thing with the line height? Because, of course, on the smaller screens, we want the line height to be a bit tighter, right? And on larger screens, we want it to be a bit more open. So maybe kind of transitioning, at the end, the same way, from 1.3 to 1.5. I mean, on large screens, it's here totally out of control, but you kind of get the idea of what we want to achieve, right? Now, we can achieve the same thing in exactly the same way when we have a minimum line height, have a maximum line height, and we want to transition from one value to another value within this range, right? In order to do this, we again use the same formula. It's exactly the same. When we actually have the entire space over which we transition, we actually know now how much space we have left, by just subtracting 21 ems, which is our starting point, from 100 VW, which is like 100% of the viewport, and then we multiply it with the weight factor, right, which is the difference between the maximum and the minimum line height, and we add the minimum, and we're done. And as a result, we have this beautiful, beautiful, line height, which does not require any media query either, right? And if we actually maybe get smaller here, it gets really slowly tighter and exactly as we want it to be, right? And we don't need any media query at all. I think this is like magic, just better, right? It's really, really cool. All right, level 1 passed. All right, let's do the second one. I hope you do appreciate sound effects. Spend hours on them. Not composing, just selecting. So the second one is the baseline. So level 2 is kind of a bit more difficult, because this is a very common thing, and still many people, at least me, I always have to figure out just the right way to do it. So what are we talking about when we're talking about the baseline? Of course, we're talking about the vertical readme. We want to implement the baseline read in CSS, but if we insert two differently formatted elements next to each other, all of a sudden they seem out of phase. They don't fit nicely. Of course, you can just use huge frameworks, but maybe there is actually a simpler way of doing this. Now, this is what we want to achieve, right? In some way. Now, this I find quite difficult to achieve very, very often, but this is always very easy to achieve. And especially visually, it's actually the same goal that we're trying to achieve. So normally we want the text to be sitting between the lines. But this, really to be precise about it, it's very, very hard, at least in my experience. However, what you can do is just make sure that it all sits on the line. That's way easier. Right, so how can we do this? Well, often we will define a common line height that's used for all elements, including the paddings and margins, occasionally also taking border width in consideration. But what if we actually make sure that the text always sits on the grid line? Now, we need to do some calculation for this. And again, we need to think about where the text sits and how the offset is going to be calculated. Because again, if you look in here, we need the text, which is normally by default somewhere around here, somewhere between the lines, to be sitting tightly on the lines. Right? So for that to make it work, we need to actually calculate the offset. Now, we need to understand how browsers actually put text on the lines, or between the lines. Now, by default, browsers will center the cap height, as it's called, which is the height of a capital letter above the baseline, between grid lines. So if we shift the cap height, when we want to put it down on the line, by half the difference between line height and cap height, think about it, half a difference between line height and cap height, because we have both of them, like we have, we're trying to do not, vertical centering, want to put it to the bottom, but we have one half at the top, we have one half at the bottom. So we're actually shifting it by half the difference between line height and cap height, right? And then the only thing we need to do is, to make it work, we need to actually play a little bit with our type, because our type might have higher, taller, and slower, and smaller x height, so we might need to play around a little bit with the offset values until the type is properly aligned with the grid. So this is what we're probably going to end up with in our SCSS file if we're using SAS. So we have the line height variable, we have a font stack, right? And we have different font sizes. It could be our breakpoints as well, kind of related to our breakpoints. And then we just need to calculate this cap height just by playing in the browser. How big the cap height should be so we can put it on the line. And then also we can use the rhythm shift function in SAS, where we're just setting the right font size, the right cap height, the right offset for all elements. And this is pretty much it. Because here, this is what we're doing with the offset, to put things on the line, on the baseline. It might not make sense now, but actually if you play around with it, it makes perfect sense. And it's actually pretty much everything you need. You don't need more than that. So once you have this function, it really becomes quite easy to deal with having the proper type set, sitting on the baseline, and also images and everything else. We just need to plug it in the function, and it actually really works. The only thing we need to keep in mind that when we're positioning, when we're applying this offset, we need to do it reliably. And this is very interesting because we, of course, have margin collapsing in CSS, right? How many of you struggled with margin collapsing in the past? What's going to happen today? I don't know. Let's figure it out, right? So have you ever tried to combine the positive and negative margin? Because if you read the spec, there are many interesting things that you will find. Now, to make the offset right, to set the offset right, we just need to combine margin top and margin bottom of the same value. One is going to be positive, and the other is going to be negative. Why? Well, because if you actually read the spec, this is what you'll find out. Collapsing works differently with positive and negative margins. If you have two positive ones, then the bigger one wins. If you have two negative ones, then the lower one wins. And if you have one positive and one negative, they sum up, so you end up with pretty much 0. Right? Well, you know that, all right. But so what it means for us is, well, we're pretty much done. We're just putting the text on the baseline, and that's it. We don't need any kind of fancy frameworks and grids and whatever. It's just already done. The only thing we have to keep in mind is that if an element doesn't have a border or padding, and its first child has a margin, that margin will flow out. So in that, to make it work, we use overflow hidden. Right? And this is what you get. Again, no media queries, nothing. It just sits nicely where it's supposed to sit. And even if if you're combining it with font size, with the calc thing, it's going to be responsive all the way. No media queries at all. I think it's really, really cool. It saves a lot of code, actually. And that guy, Jan, he wrote a very nice article explaining this technique in detail, so I highly encourage you to read it. All right? Okay. So come on, let's get active now. Now this is easy. Let's talk about the bullets. You want to build in custom bullets, and this is probably like the easiest thing you can do in CSS in general. But simple things can also be difficult. You're asked to implement a very particular style for items in an ordered list. Look carefully. How would you build it? Right? So you want exactly this. But you probably don't want to use background images, right, for all of these list style types. And so how do you do it? We have a little game, but we don't have time to play it. All right, but let's imagine the time is out, right? So how would you build it? I mean, just shout. This is not difficult to do, right? And we're at level 3 already. You already had a chance to get the chocolate. Oh, just a moment. Anybody? Okay, pseudo elements and counter. All right, I like you. We'll have to talk later. So, all right, it was close. All right, so that's exactly it, right? Because you can't use list style type. Why can't you use list style type? Well, because if you look into it, well, you have only a few options that you can use. I mean, you have list mark and you have one of 3 types, but they, for example, always have a full stop here. And you don't want a full stop, and you want to have a leading 0 as well, right? So to make it work like this, you will indeed need to use CSS counters, which allow you to define a counter at one place and then just increment it in another, right? So the way it's going to work then is we have an ordered list, right? And then we're just setting a counter, which we call list counter, with counter reset. And then we're incrementing that counter, which we defined in list counter in here on LIs and for everything. And then we're just using pseudo element before pseudo elements in order to put it inside and like getting the value from it and keep going, keep incrementing. Make sense? This is really, really kind of simple, I think, but very useful if you have this kind of special styling need. All right, this is getting dramatic. So what about the noise? We want to avoid jumps. Now you must have had this problem before. Whenever the content is dynamically injected into the DOM, or when we have above the fold or CSS or critical CSS, we use the C content jumping around. That's not nice, because having an effect like that, when you have at some point the page starts loading, you maybe start reading, you maybe start scrolling, and at some point the advertising kicks in at the top and everything shifts. That's not nice, or even worse than that. I mean, if you look in here, you don't even know what's happening, right? So you go to Kotaku.com and you start reading an article and you start scrolling down and all of a sudden it's all over the place and you really have no idea where you are. That's not a good user experience. Can I make it better? Well, we probably can. The problem is how actually would we do it? I mean, because sometimes this content is coming dynamically. You don't know the width or height sometimes. So how do you make it better? You can't, well, you could potentially with JavaScript reserve some space with placeholders, things like that. But what if you don't know what size the content is going to have? Anybody? That's kind of really hard, actually. But, I mean, we can do a few things. Now, if we know the height, it's kind of easy. We can just set min height and then, call it a day. That's fine. That's not a big deal. We can also calculate it with JavaScript on window, but it's kind of a bit too late at this point, might be, unless we want to block rendering. So what we could also do is always have a smooth transition from the initial height to the final height. And in order to make it work, what we can do, because we can't transition over the height because we don't know the height yet, we can transition over minimum height or maximum height. So this is what's happening on Braintree, where exactly this kind of really helps relieve this effect of things shuffling around or jumping around, where they actually show a min height, like a little box first, and then they transition to the actual height, over max height or min height, depending on how you implement it. But in the end, this is what it's going to look like, right? So if it's loaded, the height is going to be like 400 pixels, so you can transition over height from 0 to whatever. But even more than that, you can also transition over max height or min height. And this can be very helpful if you, let's see if I can find it quickly. Yes, if you do something like sliding doors. Well, not the old sliding doors, but if you want to have a sliding up and down effect, right? So can we build a sliding up and down menu in CSS alone to display and hide content, like I say in accordion? If we know the height, we can. If we don't know the height, well, we still can. This is what we are doing right now in Smashing. We are working on the redesign. And we have this navigation menu on here, right? And if you click on it, you basically have these areas here, and then the areas at the bottom, like articles, right? But we also have search, and this search is going to be plugged in between this area, which is appearing on the top. Again, one more time. Between this area and this area. It's like a live search. So we don't really know how tall the container is going to be. And obviously, hide auto is not going to work. And we don't want to use JavaScript for it, because it's like lazy. I mean, why would you want to use JavaScript for it? Because you can not use JavaScript as well, right? So this is what we tried to do. And this is actually interesting because it worked really well. Now, you can transition not only over the actual height, but also over the actual max height. So you can set the max height on 0 at first, and then when the element is open, you just set it at max height 1000 pixels, which is going to be way more than what your actual height is going to be. And then the browser will actually do what they want you to do. You just have to transition over the max height in here, right? The only thing you have to keep in mind that the transition duration is probably going to be different for open and for hiding and revealing. Now, why is that? Well, the problem is when you set the max height value, the element will animate visually only as far as its real height, which is exactly what we want, but the transition time will be divided over the entire length you specified. So you have to be really careful there, because if you have the same height defined, well, the same transition time defined, sometimes it's going to be very fast and sometimes it's going to be very, very slow. So in order to make it work, you need to kind of really play manually with the transition duration for opening and for closing, right? And this is it. And you don't need more than a few properties in CSS to make it work. In the end, you will end up with a few different transition durations for different states. But this is pretty much it, right? The only thing is, of course, how do we make it work for transition? Okay, so how do we make it work in browsers? Oh no, that's actually not, because we don't use JavaScript, it should be working actually anyway. So yeah, we don't, normally we would think of progressive enhancement, right? Progressive enhancement. So if we're using JavaScript, then we would need to think about what happens if JavaScript is not available, so we cannot slide down and slide up. But here, done, right? You don't have to do anything. It's like free, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, no excitement? That's all right. That's okay. That's fine. Okay, let's move to the next level. Padding. So what I'm talking about padding is padding on both sides, actually horizontal padding. So you want to add a background to inline text for headings, but the text should be padded along both the left and the right edge of each line. So left and right padding will only work if you apply it to the very first and very last line, because this is what you end up with, right? So you add padding to the text, to inline text. Let's say you have a big background image or like a big landing page with a big image on the top, and you want to have some text with some nifty padding on the left and on the right. If you just use that inline text as a block element, then the entire thing is going to be blocky and look, blocky. So what if you want to have something like an inline text, like you have sometimes in the magazine? Because normally by default you will have padding here if you apply padding left and padding right, and here, but not in here, and also not in here. So who wants some chocolates? The cameraman wants some chocolate. Anybody else? Is it too early for this? Maybe. All right. So there's a little trick, and as with all of those things, they're really straightforward and very, very simple when you saw them at least once in your lifetime. You'll never forget them. But if you don't, then you will spend a lot of time Googling, Stack Overflowing, and things like that. But that's really, really simple. You just use. Well, you could, okay, because it's an inline element, right? So if you put the element before or after, it's going to be before the first line or after the last line. Well, both, actually. But not like on edges. But I like thinking, but it's not dirty enough. Sorry? Justify. Oh. I really don't like you. You will never get a chocolate from me. Ever. No, not justify. So what we can do, and it's really, really simple, is just using Bookshare on the x-axis, on both sides. And that's it. Nobody's going to notice, actually, right? because this is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, right? On both sides, and one property in CSS, it's done. And of course, this is like a little, Fabian's method is, well, like it's not how it's supposed to be. There is also the bug decoration break, which does exactly, what it's supposed to do, but it's not supported yet. But it is coming, so in the end, it will allow us to do this just with one property. We just need to wait a little bit until Edge supports it. But everybody else is actually on board. So you can use box decoration break to achieve the same thing as well. Let's talk broken images, because we like broken images. So can we improve the experience of broken images? Because by default, they don't look very nice. By default, they look like this, which is, not very fancy. It's not beautiful at all. Can detect if an image is broken and only if an image is broken, and style a broken image differently than an actual image. So if an image is displayed, you just apply styling A, and if the image is not displayed because link is broken or the image is gone for some reason, you display something else. Can you do this? Yes? Source set or source. So can you target the source? Bruce, can you target, just a moment, can you target source attribute in CSS? Wow, that's interesting. Yes, Anna? On error, you can use on error. Yes, but there is a dirtier way of doing this. Sorry? Pseudo elements, yes. So, who was that? All right, I'm sorry, you'll have to come later to me. I have lots of chocolate, so it's like we have a lot of left. So in fact, this is very interesting. Okay, I will not do this. Okay, I can just, this is probably better. Right, so what you can do, of course, is if you're talking about the image element, it's a very special kind of element. So if you look in the spec again, the image element is the so-called replaced element. It's an element whose appearance and dimensions are defined by an external resource. So pseudo elements should not work normally. They will not work normally. So if you try to style image after or image before, if the image is displayed, it's not going to work. It's just not how it works. However, if you actually apply them, apply before and after still, if the image is broken, then the context changes, and then the text before and the text after will be displayed. So you actually have both, the benefit of both. If you have an image, stuff is not going to be displayed. If you don't have an image, this stuff is going to be displayed. So you can show something before and after, style it in any way you like, to make sure that the experience that you provide is a little bit better. And the only thing you would do for this is, again, to use before or after or both to put something in here. So again, pseudo elements save the day. They're always just like, they're always just great. Whenever we don't know what to do, it's always either pseudo elements or accordions or flexbox. So this is like the golden three. They always help. They always do the job, right? So that's pretty cool. And actually quite well supported as well. Also great articles by Ira here on styling broken images. It's time for the bonus level. Oh no, we had a bonus level already. No, we didn't. All right. Because, sorry, my mistake, my program screwed up. We're going to do the Outbreak level. I hope you really appreciate the sounds. It took me a while to figure them out. So the Outbreak, and when we're talking about the Outbreak, of course we're talking about breaking out of the containers of the boxes. So what if you want to use a full width element in a fixed width container? For example, when you want some content to extend beyond the boundaries of the container, right? So this is what you want. But it would be really lazy to say, all right, I have this container which has a max width of I don't know how many amps, like 70 amps. And I'm going to close this container, I'm going to open, add this image, and then I'm going to reopen this container again. And then, as we go, do it all over again. That's just sad and boring and a bit lazy, maybe. Can we do better than this? Viewport width? Elaborate? This is not good enough for chocolate. Okay, so some people actually on the right track here. Okay, so I'm pretty good at this, getting better. So yes, exactly, this is exactly what you can do. Because you can say, well, oh, sorry. We can say, all right, this is not what we want, right? We don't want to just keep opening and closing. That would be just boring. So what we can do instead is we can, to release the child element from its container, I hope you appreciate the wording, we need to know how much space there is between the container edge and the viewport edge. And to make it work again, we can use calc. We don't have to, but we can use calc. And more specifically, we can just we basically have to push it out and then pull it back, right? So we do it by combining, margin left calc minus 50 viewport units. So we're pushing it out, and then we're pulling it back with plus 50%. And we do it from the left side, and we do it from the right side. And we're pretty much done. The only problem we will encounter there is this, which happens all the time with viewport units. Because when you think about the viewport units, 100 VH or 100 viewport units, they're actually more than just 100% of the width. Because when the height or width of the initial containing block is changed, they're scaled accordingly, but the initial containing block size is affected by the presence of scroll bars of the viewport, which means that the viewport units do not account for the scroll bar, which is why we have the scroll bar kind of appearing, because 100 VW is more than 100% of the container, because it does not account for the scroll bar. So when the scroll bar appears, we're going to have this thingy. So we can fix it by using overflow X hidden, right, on HTML or on the body. And we're pretty much done as well. There is another way of doing this. We don't have to do it that way. If you want to avoid calc for some reasons, you can also do it slightly differently by using left 50%, margin left minus 50 VW, and right 50%, margin right minus 50 VW. And you don't need any changes in your HTML. This is pretty much free as well. So we push the container to the exact middle of the browser window with left 50 and then pull it back with negative viewport with margin, right? And there's also a nice article about this too, which I highly recommend you to read. All right, which brings us to level 13. And this is the scariest of them all. I mean, I cheated, so we didn't have like 13 levels, but this would be a perfect naming for level 13. We're going to go dirty, like really, really dirty, and we're going to cover responsive emails. Now, how many of you had a pleasure or privilege or whatever, had to build responsive emails in your life? Well, many of you. How many of you enjoyed it? Not that many. Well, I'm kind of person who enjoys building responsive emails, so it tells you a lot about me, but you can do a lot with them. But of course, building responsive emails is a nightmare. Now the question is, and this is more like an ethical question, how far are you willing to go to push the code for better email experience? Because we can do a lot in email if we are ready to go nasty and dirty. Now, how dirty are you willing to go? This is the question. Now, let's see. Now, when we talk about the email, this feels a lot, many times like going back in time, and things needs to be, different. And you're really scared to hell about what you have to code and what you have to do. And still, many emails look like this, which is not very cool. And so when you encounter something like this, obviously you're going to just delete it and forget about it. It's not like you're going to go to the desktop and check, oh, I want to check how beautiful this email looks today, right? No, you're just deleting it and move on. So many email designers are really struggling. Many email developers are struggling as well. Man, email designers too, but I mean email developers are like really. If you're an email developer, please come to the edge of the room so we will hug you, because this is really, really hard. So because you don't have JavaScript support, you have like the CSS support is like in a way available, right? And you also sometimes don't have images displayed by default. And many clients, although Gmail is changing it now, don't support media queries. So try to make that hell responsive. And then, of course, because it's not enough, the entire thing is table-based. So yeah, so sometimes you really have to do a lot of crazy stuff. So for example, I had I was working in a company, and this guy comes to me and he says, he figured it all out. He knows exactly what to do. And I said, well, what did you figure out? Well, the images are not displayed by default unless it's Gmail, right? So, but I really wanted to display that button. It was really important to display the button. So I know how to do it. I know how to do it. So how would you do it? Well, so we have buttons like 70 pixels times 30 pixels. Now this button has to be, has to be an image for some reason. I don't even know why. It has to be an image, so it has to, appear. This is important. It's an important call to action. But I figured it all out. I figured it all out. Like so what do you do? Well, 70 times 30. You just create for every single pixel in your bitmap, you create an HTML table, which is 70 times 30, with TDs, each being 1 times 1 pixel. Do you know where it's heading? And for every single bitmap pixel, you're going to draw it as a background cell, well, a background color of a cell in a table, and then you remove, borders where border collapse, and you put a link around it, and surprise, it actually works in Outlook. So he was like, that takes courage. Now, this is a lot, I don't expect you to do this. This is really, really bad. But, he was really, this is how far they're willing to go. Now, the question is, again, how far are you willing to go? So we also can style background cells, right? So if images are not displayed, so that's, we know this. But the question is, what if we wanted to build in media queries and clients that don't support it? All right, I'm very happy to know that this technique is not required anymore, because Gmail is going to support media queries later this month. But there are still many clients not supporting it, and you still have to provide some fallback sometimes. So you can mimic media queries if you combine calc, width, min width, and max width. Are you ready for this? This is the thing you're going to see. You will not be able to unsee in a bad way. So the way it's going to work is, let's say we want to have a 2-column layout on desktop view and 1-column layout on mobile, right? Just simplify. Not 4 to 2, but 2 to 1. So how to make it work? What is going to happen if your container or your parent element has, let's say, 400 pixels, but for your box, you define the width being 320 pixels, min width 480 pixels, and max width 160 pixels. You're like, what the hell is going on? So again, the width is 320, the min width is 480, and the max width is 160. Who is going to win? So who thinks that width is going to win? Who thinks that min width is going to win? Who thinks that max width is going to win? Who really doesn't care and doesn't like to raise hands? Okay, some people, all right. So the answer is, it depends. Because if you look in the spec again, you'll find that one thing is very clear to us. If the width value is greater than the width, or max width, then min width wins. Now that we understand, that makes sense. Because the max width actually restrains the growth, right? This is the point. However, if the min width value is greater than the width, or max width, then min width wins. You need to read it again to understand it. If the min width value is greater than the width, or max width, then min width is going to win. We can abuse it in many different ways. So if we wanted to build a 2-column layout that stacks and grows below 480 pixels, where 480 pixels is our breakpoint, and we cannot use it with media queries, we can mimic it if we absolutely have to by using min width, max width, and width. So what we're doing is, we're defining a min width being 50%, which is basically 2-column layout on desktop, max width 100%, which is basically 1-column layout on mobile. Then we use a width, which is a calculation of 480 pixels, which is our breakpoint, minus 100. As you can see, I like calc. 180 pixels minus 100%, which refers to the parent, times 480. And now I'm wondering, what the hell is going on? Why would you want to do this? Now, 480 pixels, again, is our breakpoint. Now, our goal is to create a value bigger than our max width or smaller than our min width for width, so that either one of these properties is applied according to the spec. All right? So here's an example. If you have, let's say, 480 pixels being your breakpoint, but you have a parent being 500 pixels, then min width is going to be 250 pixels, max width is going to be 500 pixels, width is going to be minus 9,600 pixels. And of course, because we know that min width is going to win if it's actually bigger than the width or max width, then min width actually wins, and we have 2 columns. If we are below 480 pixels, min width is 200 pixels, max width is 400 pixels, and the width is 38,400 pixels. And because the width is going to, max width is going to restrain the width, of course, max width is going to win. All right? Is it dirty enough for you? Should I go deeper? Okay, so this is that works like charm pretty much everywhere, even you're supporting media query or not. What if you wanted to build an interactive Twitter feed in your email? You don't have JavaScript support. like at all. How would you make it work? In fact, this is actually a real thing, because the email design conference, they sent out this email which contained an actual interactive email, live Twitter feed. So how would you build it? Anybody want some chocolates? Now this is really nasty. Now you can think, okay, so what can we do? Well, obviously, one thing that we can always do, and if you ask email developers or designers what they're really good at, they're really good at personalization. Because, for example, sometimes you can, this is a very interesting fact, sometimes images are going to refer to the server, right? So depending on your location and the weather in your location, if you open the same email multiple times throughout weeks, you might encounter different images displayed in your inbox, because they're actually sending different images, right? Depending on where you are. Now here's what you can do as well, because you're referring to the server, you can refer to a specific, image on the server, which is going to be updated every 2 seconds, which just pulls Twitter images from the feed, from live Twitter images, and then puts it all in one image every 2 seconds, and then you just animate the entire thing using clip property and a bit of transition. It's almost real. Seriously, it's not like we are faking. It's real, but there is no other way to make it work in an email, right? And of course, there are many other things you can do in email, and we will get back to another one just in a second. But if you have to build something like this, there are 2 resources I highly recommend you. One is responsive email patterns. The other is responsive email resources.com. The slides will be available anyway. They actually are already. So this is pretty cool. Now that's dirty enough, but what about the ultimate horror scenario for responsive emails? Can we replicate interactivity that requires maintaining state, such as switching tabs or panels or toggle menus with CSS alone, because we don't have JavaScript in emails? The answer is, of course, yes, because there is a dirty, really nasty and horrible and bad and disgusting checkbox hack, right? Where the idea is, we'll use a connected label and checkbox input to control another element. So we hide the checkbox, but label still toggles its value on and off. Then we're just using adjacent sibling selector. By using it, we can style the div differently based on the checked state. This is what it looks like. We have a label, we have an input, we have a div. So we're going to hide, hide the input, and we're going to keep the label. And then if the input has been checked, because somebody clicked on the label, then in that case we're going to style this div differently, right? So we can mimic this interactivity. So we know this is not a big deal. It's also known as the checkbox hack. There have been many articles about this. But what if you want or have to build something like this? So you think shopping cart, increasing value, thumbnails, changing colors, adding things to the shopping cart, calculating the price live, selecting shipping address, credit card validation, button, in an email. Can you make this work in an email? And I'm not kidding, it's not a fancy GIF or so, it's an actual prototype from an actual email being sent to Outlook or Gmail or whatever, right? Where you can actually buy everything. You can pretty much pre-select whatever, and then you click a button, and then you basically made a purchase. So it's basically the full checkout experience in an email. Full interactive checkout experience in an email. So how would you make it work? Again, the question is how dirty you're willing to go. Now, one thing that's used to work in the past, and it could still work today, actually, is this. Does it look familiar to some of you? So if you look into it, so the holes in here, they're kind of symbolic for a specific state. So depending on where the hole is, you can say, well, on and off and on and off and so on, right? So if you put it all together, you have a very unique state. What if we move away from this towards something more beautiful and modern like this? How would you feel about it? Would you enjoy it? Would you like it? Would you think that this is crazy and dirty enough? Well, yes. So you'll have lots of radio buttons. Lots and lots and lots of radio buttons and labels. And this is your CSS. So basically, is on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, oh, then style display block, right? for everything. So you can imagine how it's going to work, right? So basically every single step in the checkout, like for example, the thumbnails, like the carousel and this kind of stuff, and then selecting the shopping, the shipping address and whatever, it's all a single div, and then this is of course toggled using the checked thingy, right? More than that, this thing contains 117 radio buttons, 4 checkboxes, multi-page layout. You can add and remove products. I think it's more like 44 checkboxes, not 4 checkboxes. Adding, removing products, editing quantity, color, and size. You can also see live calculation. We'll talk about how you can do it in a second. Select payment and delivery, form validation. I didn't even know how it actually worked without HTML5 form validation or JavaScript. And then fallback is just a regular old email, which is going to be the first div in this series of divs, right? And this is probably what you think you would do in order to calculate the price, because you can't calculate the price in with JavaScript. So if somebody adds quantity, you just have to use lots of counters, as we saw in the beginning. Counters amazing, and then you are just changing or incrementing a counter based on the state, checked or not checked. It's not like you have you have to define every single state, but you can increment it dynamically using the counters. And then you present it using the content property in here, and it feels almost live, right? The only thing is you need somehow to use the content property again. This is like really, really dirty, in order to make sure that when people click on the button to submit the form, that it actually does exactly what it does. So in the end, you concatenate all kind of different states in the content with the content property to give it like an actual link, to create an actual link, which is kind of crazy. But it worked. And you think, what the hell? I mean, this can't possibly work anywhere. Well, it depends. So the only thing we need is the checked support, adjusting sibling selector, and a lot of weird CSS. So in email, the file size is limited to 102 kilobytes, so that's kind of a big deal. That's kind of bad, because you will end up with more than that potentially. And in Gmail, CSS is limited to 12,000 characters. But you can still make it work, and if you look into the browser support for this, full interactive support, which means you can fully fill in the form, the entire form, is 61% of popular email clients based on the stats from the email client market share by Litmus, right? So that's a lot. So you can really have your checkout experience, full checkout experience, in an email, which is like performance is the best you can always get because it's like almost offline, right? And in the worst scenario, I mean, some clients, like 20%, are going to have like a limited experience, so they may be going to, not everything is going to work, but that button that will lead eventually to the shopping cart will still work. And sometimes you will have just a static first div displayed. In that case, again, you click on the button, you're still brought to the checkout page, so it still works, right? And it's not me who came up with this, and you need to be very special to do this. But Mark Robbins, he came up with this, and it actually works really well. So he's working at a company called Rebel Mail, and they're doing it full time. So, and of course, you will not just go ahead and do all of the checkboxes manually. That would be like, you'll have to build something like a generator to build it for you. Otherwise, you'll just go nuts and crazy. But you can make it work, and it works really, really well, apparently. So if you want to check it out, these slides are, by the way, also done in using this technique. Whatever. Well, he's really into checked and labels. So, but he's a really, really smart guy. So thanks, Mark. All right. So this has been the game. I hope that you had some fun playing it. I don't know how many points you scored. I still have some chocolate left. I'm not going to take it with me. So if you want to shed some chocolate, I have some. And again, the slides are going to be available anyway. And yeah, it was fun being here. Thank you so much for coming.